Vic Garcia here with Jacob Cooperman, and you are listening to the initial No Contest podcast. We're in the aftermath of UFC 297. There's a lot of things going on. Jacob, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm good. That card almost felt like a fever dream. I don't know if it's because of everything that's going on in my life right now personally, but I remember I told you this right before we started recording. I woke up at 1:30 and I expected the fight to be over because I literally checked Google. I was like, oh, okay, I want to see who what. And I refreshed the stream and it was literally 30 seconds left in round number 5. Also, the fight itself, I caught half of it or I caught a little bit of it. I know it was a very, very hotly contested decision. Yeah, man. I'm doing good. I'm ready to talk some fighting. We've tried shows like this before, but I feel like this one will be the one to stick.
Look, we've had a few, we've had some tryouts, man, but this is the one that's going to stay, like you're saying right now. And last night's card was a fever dream. You're young, you have no excuse, but for me, I'm older. It went on way too late. I'm out here Central Time, so by the time that thing got done, I think it was closer to 1 in the morning. But it was worth watching. The two headlines from the two fights that made noise, and we'll focus more on the main event. But the other one was Raquel Pennington
Yeah,
winning
yikes.
the vacant bantamweight title. She has been a tough product. I remember watching her on The Ultimate Fighter, and it was a pretty solid fight. Although the fans didn't quite get that it was. I think they wanted to see a more traditional stand-in and banging fight, but it ended up being a lot more on the ground, a lot more grappling. But I think a well-deserved victory for her, beating Bueno Silva. What did you think of that matchup? Did you catch any of the highlights of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because, I personally have just seen the backlash. I watched up until about, I think, the Mike Malott fight against Neil Magny, and then that's kind of when I passed out. But I've seen some of the highlights of the fight, and I've heard what people are saying. I think it is one of those things. I'm not calling the MMA community misogynistic. I do think that in general, women's fights do get a little bit less slack than men's. Call that what you want to call that. Like for purist fans of the sport, they're tuning in and and I'm talking about like diehard fans of the sport. They're tuning in. They don't care if it's a women's fight. They're watching it and they can appreciate. Let's just say, like for instance, that fight between Brandon Royval and Alessandre Pantoja, the most recent fight that they had, that was a very ground heavy fight, right? That was a
Right.
very there's a lot of grappling exchanges, a lot of scrambles. If it's the same fight with Raquel Pennington or Raquel, I don't know why I said Raquel. Do we not us, but does the MMA community talk about that fight the same way? I don't know. It is kind of a thing I feel like with women's sports where it's like there is in general less bail given, right? And I'm not saying that it wasn't at times. Like I personally I enjoy a more action-packed fight. I can appreciate more technical fights, but I don't know. I didn't think it was as bad as everyone was making it out to be, quite honestly.
I didn't think it was bad, and I thought it was a really good fight, and I thought people that were the critical people of it and the little bit of the booing that happened, I honestly don't think. Look, let's just be honest. Some people still go to MMA fights and they're hoping for the Nate Diaz style fight where they're up there, they're throwing. They don't want to see anything that hits the ground unless it's fast, kind of like the Ronda Rousey, and compared to the Ronda Rousey era, those Ronda Rousey takedown chokes, were impressive. They got cheers. They were got highlights. Those still get attention. But when it's like people working for submission, working for a move, working to get out, um, and it's kind of slows down, people don't appreciate it as much. I think most of the real MMA purists understand that and they go for it, but we still have that amount. And then you factor in you put in the alcohol factor also, you're drinking, you want to see some action. It's in much in life, people want to see the action, right? They were wrong about that. And then the other thing too, and again, you talk about misogyny and everything. You want to see attractive women fight. Not to say these women aren't attractive, but Raquel Pennington is a lesbian woman. She's not Ronda Rousey. Let's put it that way. And there's nothing wrong with that. But again, that could be another reason why people are
Yeah,
harder on those type of fights. Let's be honest. Let's just being honest.
and that's what I'm saying. I don't know if it's necessarily, and maybe I'm being too harsh, or maybe I'm being too light on some of these fans. Like maybe it is more misogynistic, maybe it's not. But I do agree. It is kind of, it's similar in that I think it's the perfect storm of everything coming together, because you know what? Now that I think about it, the example that I made with Alessandro Pantoja and Brandon Royval, that was a fight that people look back on fondly, at least again, the people that are in the know, because you're right. Like it was fast. There was a lot of high level scrambles. In general, the pace, even though Pantoja was going for submission after submission or takedown after takedown, that was a high level and high pace fight. I think in these types of fights, it does fall into, and this is the same thing, I think that kind of poisons the well a lot of times with like submission grappling. People just don't want to watch someone spend, let's just say 2-3 minutes, you know, I don't know, getting themselves in the half guard, right? Getting the opponent's arm seat belted over the neck over time so you can, sit off to the side and create an angle for an arm triangle. Like, unfortunately, and I feel like I also shouldn't say that like the fans that don't appreciate that are automatically like, just bleed. Like there, I think it has to be a very specific type of fan that will appreciate that. And I find myself even sometimes like I appreciate the technicality of the sport. Even I sometimes will see a fight like that and I'm like, man, like I just wish that we could see a little bit more action here. Because we also have to, we can't pretend like we're not MMA fans, because it's a game of chess with a lot of violence. And I think Joe Rogan said something like that, you know? So
Right.
I don't know. I think it's important to mention that. And I think it's a little bit of both, maybe, in that, like, yeah, unfortunately, some of the most marketable women in MMA are the ones who are the most attractive, right? And it's a sport in which a lot of males watch it, and I'm not saying it's right, but that's the unfortunate truth of the situation, is that you could have one of the most technical. I mean, remember what happened to Rose Namajunas? Like how quickly the public opinion shifted on her after that Carlos
Oh,
Esparza fight.
well, yeah, and you talk about Royval too. At least the Royval said recently that they're playing it safe, and Naman Yunus played it safe, and it people turned on her, and they still do. I don't think it's a wrong thing to say, And here's an interesting stat from the fight that they threw up there that got to me is Pennington is the sixth bantamweight championship in history. That's starting from when Ronda Rousey came over.
When was that?
And,
That must have been way back, right? When did they induce women into the, or
God,
introduce? Excuse me,
it's crazy. It seems like such a long time ago, and it really wasn't that long
early
ago. I believe it
2000s.
was 2014,
Oh wow, not even early 2000s.
2013. I mean, we're not talking that long ago, and we've only had six champions in that division. And Ronda Rousey had a long stretch.
Nunez had a pretty long
Nunez.
stretch.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, Nunez was amazing, and here we go. She's only the sixth champion, so the women's MMA is still growing relatively a little slower than the men's in the sense that people still, it still has their doubters and everything like that. But I thought it was a fine and appropriate uh co-main event for the night.
I also will say just about Rose in general, Roy Val was playing it safe. I feel like almost in a different type of way to Rose. Rose was definitely, when she says playing it safe, I feel like there's playing it safe in the way that Roy Val was, where you're sticking behind the jab and you're, trying to set things up, but you just maybe fail in a certain way to kind of step on the gas and go. Whereas Rose, I mean, I'm not saying that performance was a performance that she should be proud of, because I don't think it was. The only point that I'm really making is that Rose before that has had so many great and dominant performances. I think about that head kick win over Zhang Wei Li. I think it was.
Yeah, I
Yeah, that
believe it
question
was.
mark kick, lead kick. And it seems like everyone immediately, that's the only point I make, is it just seems like probably sometimes women fighters get a little bit less slack, and that everyone like all of a sudden just forgot the caliber of fighter that Rose was, and forgot that she also deals with mental issues that might make it a little bit harder for her to pull the trigger in there.
I think with her too is that she had such a run of spectacular. Think about it this way: it's like the Super Bowl. There's been a stretch here, and I think this is always good for the NFL, even though they don't think about this. I think it's good that there's a blowout every once in a while, because the more you watch everything that's like the Patriots and Falcons, when the Patriots came back from down 28-3, the more you get all these great matchups, you expect them, and anything else is a dud. And I think that was the effect in regards to Rose Namajunas, and that she had some amazing performances she had
Spoiled
put
the
on a
fans.
stretch. Yeah, that they wanted to see that, and they reacted. I I thought it was a little overkill. It was, look, on the same level too. It was a boring matchup.
It really
Okay,
was. And you know what? To be fair, fans gave Covington the same treatment when he really struggled. I mean, that was another stinker of a fight. And
right.
it didn't help that he built up the fight like that. But yeah, there is something to that. And I'm not trying to be the capped crusader here for, like,
Look,
oh, but it's
you,
true.
you're woke, and everybody knows it, Cooperman.
Yeah, I can't go back now. I try to call things for the way they are, and it's definitely, again, I don't know if,
No, no, I got it. You got to be honest. Got to be honest.
yeah, I'm not trying, like, and this is me. It's like, I don't know if misogyny is necessarily the word that we should jump to first. I think it's something else. Maybe it's
Look, women are getting less slack than men. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with saying that, because in their eyes, even though it has been around longer, but in the UFC, it's it's only been it hasn't even, I don't know, maybe a decade, man. That's it. We're talking, 10 to 12 years of existing in the UFC, which is going to hit their 300th big event, coming up here. But let's also talk about, we're talking about, I called you woke, which can be a trigger word depending on who you're talking to. But one person that's not woke is Sean Strickland, who got a lot of attention this week for some
here's the thing,
cra
guys.
craziness. Yeah. I personally don't want to bother getting into that part of it. I want to stay more to the fight aspect, but he defended his championship against Dricus du Plessis from South Africa. Didn't turn out well for Strickland. It was du Plessis's night. He is now the world champion, the new world champion, because of a split decision. But Strickland, to his credit, took the loss. It seemed like he accepted it, shook Duplessis' hand after all the shenanigans that happened last month, right? He jumped out of the front rows, the back, which never helps the sport. Those things never help the sport with the main people. And then people were also trying to make a big deal about, um, and I'm not diminishing homophobia, I'm not, but if you don't think there's homophobia in every sport and this is still the world, in every country and everything. There's no magic land, and it's a weird situation. I know there's some fringe people that would call for Sean Strickland to get his championship taken away from him because of homophobia. Um, I don't know necessarily helps. I don't think that helps anybody, but whatever. I look, Sean Strickland has stupid views, and he's funny, and he's funny.
You know what though? Like, I see, I'm not trying to be the guy that's just the opposite of whatever the obvious take is. I know that Sean is really heavily favored right now in the media and the public. He's kind of the, I don't know, he's like the breakout star that we have right now. Every once in a while, there comes someone that's like, oh shoot, like this is the MMA fans, like, we love this guy. We're gonna put this guy up on a pedestal. I've seen it happen a couple times. I never personally understood the hype with Sean. I think he's a really great fighter, and I think he surprised a lot of people, myself included, with that performance over Israel Adesanya. But I don't know. I think it showed a lot of his true colors when he's threatening to stab a guy and then they see each other in person. I saw some people saying, like, oh yeah, like, any guys that don't understand that the only reason Sean didn't do anything was because Dricus was with his girl. Like, you need to understand guy code. I was like, that's not guy code. I tend to think that if you're in the build up to a fight and you're a guy like Sean Strickland, that it seems like nothing's off limits for you. You could say whatever you want, you could do whatever you want, and you urge people to say or do whatever they want. I feel like it's very hypocritical to take a fight build up to the point where you are threatening to stab someone. And I know he said, "Oh yeah, Drickus and I, we like pieced it up over Instagram DM." You guys pieced it up because you threatened to stab him. I don't know. I never understood the hype necessarily behind Sean Strickland. I think he's one of those guys, like, he says he wants free speech, but he just wants free speech to be able to say, like, dumb shit that a 14-year-old would say. You know what I'm saying? He's like one of those
I,
guys.
I just think this is where the sport hasn't evolved, and this is where, to be honest with you, I don't think it'll. I know sometimes Dana White gets criticism because he wants it to be more like football, or he wants it to more like the other professional sports. But when it comes to fighting, you end up you still have this hype train that goes back generate. This is stuff that was used to be done in carnivals and circuses, right? And they still have that part of it, and it's what makes it fun. And I tend to look over some of the craziness. Like Covington, especially, to bring Covington into it, it's an act. I don't necessarily think it's all like an act to gain attention, to look cool. All these guys want to look cool. They don't want to not only be the best, they want to look cool. They want to be uh hip, and they want you to buy pay-per-views so they can make more money. Anyway,
Yeah.
I even regret bringing it up a little bit, but anyway, it
No, no,
was an
no.
interesting.
It's not something. It's something that needs to be said, Vic. Like that. I really couldn't figure out a way to say that, but you put it really well. Which is like when I see Sean Strickland, I see the kid in high school that would say something really offensive because he wanted people to think he was cool and edgy and wanted people to like him. That's
And
my personal read.
and he might actually believe all that stuff, and you know what? That's fine. People are going to have to get over the fact that there's people with other views. And sometimes you can agree with them, sometimes whatever, but I don't even, what the funny thing with Strickland is? I don't even know what he's trying to say sometimes.
I don't
Like
think
you
he
said,
knows. I think he just starts a sentence and he just says, "Let me see where this takes me."
yeah.
You know.
And so but at the same time, I'll defend him on one thing. I know what that reporter was trying to do.
Oh, that reporter. Yeah, that
Yeah,
reporter. 100%
the
was.
reporter
Yeah.
was, he would have never said those things, and that was the thing, and it makes Strickland look bad, but the reporter also has a part in that because he's just trying to, you know, nobody goes to watch Sean Strickland because they agree with his views on homosexuals.
Yeah,
You
what
know
did
what
you
I'm
think he was
saying?
gonna say? Like, it's so funny. It's like you think Sean was gonna be like, "Well, you know what? I really thought, and I took some time to really reflect on some of the hurtful comp." It's Sean Strick. The guy literally said, and I'm saying this as a Jewish man. This guy has literally said, "I used to be a neo-Nazi. I used to hate black people." Like, this is one of the most, in a weird way, honest people, but also one of the most probably volatile people that you're gonna run into. Why on earth the reporter thought anything? I mean, we know he didn't think that Sean Strickland was going to give a thoughtful and carefully worded response and apology, but it's
But
just dumb.
why are you gonna prod this guy that's not
That's
uh
what I'm saying. He probably
it's
just knew
not
what was going to
an
get.
authority to speak on this topic like that, and he's clearly not baking with all the ingredients. That's what's happening there.
When we say like bait from the media, like I know we've talked about this quite a bit, Vic, off camera, but I don't. I think it was less so than a bait. I think it was one of those things where the first one of the first things they teach you in journalism school is don't be the story. I think this reporter probably had something personally that he wanted to get off his chest with
That,
Strickland.
that's gone now. These people don't believe that stuff, and I can say that as a
Yeah,
journalist. They don't do that. They don't follow their own
codes.
teachings in here. So beyond all the shenanigans here, Coop, let's talk about the fight. Were you surprised it was a split decision? Do you think Dreykus did enough to win the belt there?
Like I said, I didn't. I don't. I gotta rewatch the fight because I don't feel comfortable commenting on something, especially with this, that I didn't see the full matchup for, right? But what I do know is a lot of times with these fights, and this is something I've kind of realized, even commentating at an amateur level, like I've had a couple of these fights at my last show I did back in what was that? Maybe was that wow. It's 21st, so that was the 12th. That was only 9 days ago. That feels like a month ago. But we had a couple of fights for the title that ended like that. And man, it really sometimes it's like the Schrodinger's cat.
Right.
Sometimes it could be like Schrodinger's championship. Like there sometimes I think this is especially one of those fights where you could really have it go either way and still be correct. If everything that I've heard from people that have watched the fight, and with how divisive it is and how close it is, everyone seems to have it 3 rounds to each fighter. So it's like, someone will say, "Oh, I think DDP got rounds 2, 4, and 5," and then it seems like it was very, very with a swing round in between. I think it's one of those things where confidently, I agree with MMA Guru, we can't really call that a robbery. A robbery
Yeah.
would be like if there was a clear cut winner and the other guy lands a big shot, and drops. Let's just say we have for the upcoming fight, Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint Denis. Let's say Dustin Poirier's putting in real good work. Rounds 1, 2, and 3, he's landing constantly. Round 4, Benoit uncorks a gigantic kick and drops Poirier. Poirier gets back up to his feet, keeps on boxing, finishes off the fight. And let's say Denise gets rounds 4 and 5, and they give Denise rounds 4 and 5. Like, that in itself is something where, maybe but from what I've heard, this fight has been razor, razor thin. So I don't
No,
think you could even have robbery in there.
I believe in that old adage that, don't leave it in the hands of the judges. And this was one of those where, yeah, I could see you can make the argument for the other side. Dana White thought Sean Strickland won, even though, from what I've read, he has said that they're not going to go with the rematch. But it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't a robbery. It was just too close, and that's what happens when you don't finish someone or choke someone out. Or finish. Well, that's finishing too, but that's what happens when you don't finish someone. I was not angry at the results. I thought it was a good fight. I thought it was decent. Sean Strickland looked worse for wear, but that is what happens when you don't dominate or just straight out take the win.
Right. And, to your point, the optics, like a lot of times optics I've realized are really big in this sport. So Sean had that big cut that I think was either caused by a headbutt or an elbow. I'm going to watch the fight back later. I might do a YouTube video on it as well. Just giving my honest thoughts and perspectives. But from what I saw, it looked like, well, Drickus was wearing the fight as well, but Sean optically had blood coming down his face, right? He, at the time, I feel like was wearing the fight more from pictures that I've seen. So unfortunately, when you have such a razor thin fight like this, the judges, and you could have this conversation about the judges maybe not being the most steeped or knowledgeable in MMA, will go with the person that's easier to identify. That's like human nature, right? Our
Right.
brains are designed to make things easier to delegate on. That's why prejudices exist. That's why biases exist, right? Like the judges will say, oh, I mean, Strickland's was landing a nice jab and a nice teep kick, but Drickus was backing up and firing off body kicks, and he cut Sean Strickland open with a big elbow. And even though it was one elbow, look at Sean Strickland's face. Boom. Drickus got that round. So honestly, I mean, optics do play a big part in fights. And it might just be a judge thing. Like maybe we just have to get more well-informed or well-educated judges that actually can break down a fight more critically than they are now. I'm not saying that they're terrible, but it might just be that, hey, we have to kind of dot our I's and what is it? P's our Q's, dot our I's, cross our T's.
Cross
Something
the
like
T's.
that.
You got it right there.
Yeah.
Dot the I's, cross the T's.
And watch our P's and Q's. Yeah.
Exactly. I want to ask you a question here because you have a lot more expertise than me on boxing. I tend to lean more on the MMA side of things, but Anthony Joshua, Francis Ngannou is going to happen. It was announced last week or a couple weeks ago. It's going to happen March 9th in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. There's a few things here. Let's unpack this a little bit. So Ngannou signed up with the PFL, Professional Fighters League. Okay. PFL just merged with Bellator. They're working all that. It's kind of a weird thing. Bellator technically is going to live on in Europe, I believe, and they're going to at some point merge everyone. My belief in how that factors in is that the PFL did not have the competition in the heavyweight division for Francis Ngannou.
No, they didn't.
So that's why I think they bought Bellator. One of the reasons, because Bellator has more heavyweights that are.
It's a really smart move. I don't know if you saw the card that they're doing, the champions versus champions card that they have coming up.
For people like me, it looks cool, but Bellator has become so irrelevant. I hate to say that because we talked about our history and what we do here, and you do work for smaller promotions. I remember going to Connecticut, talking a friend into driving me to Connecticut and going to Atlantic City with Luis J. Gomez and watching Bellator events, these small Bellator events with Kurt Pellegrino, talking to the owner of the promotion at the time. This is before they sold out to Paramount, Paramount, and for some reason his name eludes me, but I've spoken to him in numerous times. He's kind of out of the whole MMA loop now. Doing these small cards, and I liked Bellator, and I really wanted to get behind Bellator, but Bellator never really elevated. The PFL has elevated. The PFL is on ESPN. I think it benefits from the fact that the UFC's on ESPN because people think it's all the same, so the ratings go up. I like the tournament concept. I like, the winner gets a big $1 billion. It's a good thing, but they weren't ready for Ngannou, and I think they knew that. And I think the plan was now that they were going to let him go boxing. My biggest concern with Ngannou, because Anthony Joshua is a legit boxer, and I think my biggest concern regarding Francis Ngannou is that his fight with Tyson Fury and the fact that he caught him by surprise has given him this false sense of he's a real legitimate boxer. Now, this is a man who's pushing, I believe he's in his late 30s now. This is a guy who's kind of not in the latter end of his career because careers are different now. And in MMA, especially, it feels like the late 30s, early 40s. A lot of these people have runs. But my concern is that he doesn't have the surprise factor with Anthony Joshua anymore that he would have, had this been his first fight. It probably is not going to turn out like it did with Tyson Fury. And he's starting to get in his head and think, I'm a real boxer. And I think he has a lot of skills, and I think he worked with Mike Tyson. He had a lot of great. He didn't take it half. He wasn't half-assed about it. He took it very seriously. Is this a mistake? Is what I'm trying to say.
Maybe I'm just too much of an optimist, but while I don't give him much of a chance versus AJ, and I don't think, like, I had people talk to me in the comments of my video about, oh, you're not giving you're not giving Ngannou enough credit. Tyson did train. I think in this situation, it's not. I saw a lot of people calling me a hater too. It's not a hater thing to say that Ngannou has to go out and prove to us just because he boxed and fought very well against Tyson Fury. That was still a close fight. People forget about that. Just
Right.
because he knocked Fury down does not necessarily mean that he is automatically going to be against the best of the best in terms of heavyweight boxing if he's just going to be able to be competitive with anyone.
Factor this in, by the way.
Yeah.
Was Tyson Fury taking that fight that seriously?
Well, that's everyone says he was. I mean,
I didn't think he looked it. I know he's always been a little big in the
midsection, yeah, but
in the midsection, but he didn't look in great shape. I don't think he took it as seriously as people think he did.
Right. And that's my whole thing is I don't necessarily. I think we should pump the brakes a little bit on just throwing Ngannou in there with the likes of AJ, with the likes of an Alexander Usyk, like, especially considering the fact that if Ngannou manages to knock AJ out, I mean, you have to think about it from a boxing perspective. We kind of tend to think about it from an MMA perspective because we're two MMA guys. Like,
right.
Think about what that would do to the sport of boxing. If you just have some MMA guy that hits really hard come in and he's taking out the top level talent and competition in the heavyweight division, I do think we need to kind of pump the brakes on that. Although I will say the PFL signing Francis Ngannou was one of the smartest things they could have ever done. I think if I was going to put myself in their shoes, it's a do this first and ask for acceptance or do damage control later type of deal, right? Where they get Francis Ngannou. They then say, okay, we've got Francis Ngannou. Instead of saying, okay, how do we build up our heavyweight competition? How do we build up our homegrown talent? Why don't we go out? Why don't we get Francis Ngannou? Why don't we let him box, build up his star? They probably banked off of the fact that he was going to get a little bit of publicity because he is such a heavy boxer, or excuse me, a heavy hitter, to go out into boxing, build his star power up. They say, hey, while Francis Ngannou is boxing, now we're going to go out and we're going to get Bellator. We're going to acquire Bellator. We're going to have them go head to head in a championship versus championship card. They don't have the biggest names, but it's a help, right? Because do I want to see Ryan Bader versus Francis Ngannou? I wouldn't not watch it. You know what I wouldn't watch is Francis Ngannou versus some random unknown PFL heavyweight that I've never heard of a day in my life. So I think in terms of having to think on the fly, especially in acquiring Jake Paul too, where he's going to be competing in MMA, I think that's the reason we're seeing PFL coming up so well is that I think it's I forget his name, Dan Donner or something like that, Dan Donker. I think he's just been making a lot of really really solid on the fly decisions, and that's what we're seeing, man. Like to me, this is it's making the best out of a maybe suboptimal situation where the PFL has bought all this old talent from the UFC, has a few names on their roster now, Derek Brunson, like and they're starting to build up with a product that can compete with the UFC on a big scale. So I personally like what they're doing over there.
And by the way, it's because I was curious. I was like, it's Dan Donner, and it's Don Davis, but
Don Danner Davis,
yeah,
Don Danzler, like
but it's spelled weird. It's like it's Don
two
with
ends,
two
right?
N's. Yeah,
Yeah,
two N's, and then what you gonna do? But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with this stuff. I find it interesting they're still going to keep the Bellator brand open in England. This is kind of like a lower level. Remember when the UFC bought Pride, and then they were originally the concept was they were going to keep Pride going as a separate promotion, but then it ended up it wasn't going to happen. There was apparently some Yakuza stuff in the background, so the numbers were not going to work, and they did the merger, and they get to keep the intellectual property. So but I'm curious to see how they make this work at the PFL. I believe they re-signed with ESPN to extend their relationship. So I mean the future is looking bright for them. Remember when they were the World Series of Fighting, the MMA World Series of Fighting?
yeah, and even back then they had a big home ground. That's the other thing too. Is like I'm not saying that they can't come out with any really really. I mean, I think they also signed Cedric Doumbé, if I'm not mistaken, from Glory K. So they have like they're making good moves, and we've seen in the past like Justin Gaethje was a World Series of Fighting standout. People
Right.
forget about that. Like he got to the UFC from there, and look where he is at now. So yeah, I think PFL will be. I don't know if they're necessarily ever going to be able to compete with the UFC, or did I say PFL is going to be able to compete with the UFC, but they're definitely building themselves up to be a very viable option for fans that want to watch the sport.
We got to talk. We'll do it another time, but we should get into in depth. But I want to talk about one championship and some of the weird things that they're doing, and uh, and their business model. So maybe that can be something we can do for a later episode
Yeah, and
there.
calling out the UFC. I mean, to me, that just seemed like when one championship's owner called out the UFC, it just that screamed cry of attention for me because I actually like one. I feel like their production quality is really good and the quality of fights they put out is fantastic, but their market is not in the US.
Oh
And
yeah,
they've
for
tried
sure.
to bridge it over, but I thought it was a weird thing to take pot shots at be the same thing as like the UFC taking pot shots at one. It's almost to me they're like in such different worlds. Even though I'll watch a one card from time to time, that it doesn't make any sense to try and involve yourself if you're the UFC with one or if you're one with the UFC.
We wish them luck. We'll get more in depth in that next time. But Coop, I think this is a good first episode that we've done here, and I look forward to doing more episodes with you in the future.
Vic, it's been awesome, man. I think we should probably do this weekly, right? I mean, I feel like that's you do it
Yeah,
weekly on Sundays, maybe some live shows, something like that down the line.
let's do it weekly. But for Jacob Cooperman, I'm Vic Garcia, and we're going to be doing this weekly.
We'll
And
see you guys
we
in the
are
next one.
exactly.